constantly. Like, oh my God, that's probably why.
All right, guys. We are live. John is back in his living room, back from Oxnard, California. We're excited to have him back because he has all the takeaways from camp. I've been talking about the way John analyzes practices in camp for weeks now. John had the chance to go to camp. We've seen all the videos. You guys probably watched him on the Locked On show, which was a really cool deal with you and Landon, live on location. Also, there are the Olympics going on, and for John is a black belt Brazilian jiu-jitsu artist. I think artist is the right word. And he's extremely interested in the Olympic wrestling that's going on right now. So you'll see him peek up, and we may get some live wrestling analysis too today as we go through John's takeaways from camp. So John, I'm gonna just tee you up here. What is like the biggest takeaway, big picture that you have after you spent there was 3 practices that you were there, 4 days. They were off on Sunday, I think, but you got to watch 3 days worth of padded practices. Seemed like some really good work went in while you were there. Talk to the people. Tell us, what's your biggest takeaway that you saw while you were there?
I mean, my biggest takeaway mainly was just how different Mike Zimmer's defense is to Dan Quinn's. I mean, it was something that I repeatedly brought up with really everybody I was talking to. And you really heard it become a bigger and bigger talking point as the weekend wore on. And by the time, Monday rolled around, everybody was talking about it on their podcasts and everything. But it's just like I don't want to say it's a completely different defense, but it's almost a completely different defense. I mean, the number one thing you notice is the amount of disguise that Mike Zimmer is using on a snap-by-snap basis. He is painting a picture pre-snap of one thing, and he is usually transitioning to another, and it can be almost anything. He's willing to, have guys at the line of scrimmage drop back into the deep center field. He's been having cornerbacks who align off, then they do a jump press into a cover 2. You've been seeing linebackers jump and take unconventional coverage roles to try to throw off the quarterback, and that caused more than a couple incompletions for particularly Cooper Rush and Trey Lance. He had Micah Parsons moving all over the place. Luckily, we heard that Micah Parsons is playing a ton of off ball and stuff. And while he does line up off ball, most of the things that he's doing are allowing him to play forward like we wanted him to. And he is rushing the passer, I would say 95% of passing snaps. I only saw him over the course of my 3 days of practice. I only saw him drop back in the coverage maybe a handful of times, do some short zone drops, maybe some QB spy stuff. And I think that was just kind of similar to how Mike McDonald uses his defense, is about how anybody can drop at any time type thing, just to keep the offense guessing and stuff and try to exploit protection schemes. One thing you saw Mike Zimmer working on routinely, we always talk about how the double A-gap mug pressure is something that confuses offenses, because whichever way the center pivots, you can have the other mugged A-gap linebacker rush, and sometimes you can create a free rusher that way. But the way that the Cowboys are actually having the most success, and this was even against Dak Prescott, was they mug the 2 A-gaps, and then at the snap, they drop those 2, and they send edge pressure, whether it be a nickel blitz, slot blitz, or a lot of times where they would have Micah line up off ball, and then he'd kind of like tornado or like curve around the offense as the snap and rush off edge there. And that worked more than a handful of times. So it's just Mike Zimmer was really rolling out the entire Rolodex, kind of showing the breadth of scheme that he's going to use from a coverage perspective. You saw a ton of quarters coverage, especially compared to what Dan Quinn did. You saw that picket fence lineup where the cornerbacks and safeties are all kind of lined up at that 7 to 12 yard mark ish, all around there. And they were doing a good job passing off route combinations, taking their stuff. You saw like Kalen Carson, the rookie, really, really, really took well to the schemes that Zimmer was using. The one thing that I would say that I saw that they struggled with a little bit was that when they were playing single high coverages, mostly cover 3, they were struggling getting the single high safety to nail down on those big post crossers that teams like Shanahan and McVay love to use. and then having the cornerback replace him deep. That safety was just a little bit slow nailing down on those crossers, and we saw the Cowboys offense take advantage of that quite repeatedly over the 3 practices. So that's kind of one area that I would hope to see them shore up. But overall, it's just a completely different scheme. We saw them using over fronts. You saw them using under fronts. You saw them using the tight front on occasion. They're even working on penny fronts where they would use 3 nose tackles with 2 edge defenders on the side. So it's just a much more diverse scheme that uses a much wider array of fronts and coverages mixed in to give the Cowboys, I think, more answers against more offenses and to give offenses more things that they have to prepare for.
Yeah, I think one of the things about Dan Quinn's defense is he used a lot of different alignments on the front. He'd use 4 down, he'd use 5 down, he'd use 3-man, the tight fronts like you're talking about. He'd use some of that kind of stuff. But the back end was like extremely simple. And so what he was doing was he was relying on that front to cause enough chaos to allow the back end to play simple, but still be able to make plays and get stops and stuff like that. Zim is not going to do that. Zim is going to mix stuff up on the back end and on the front, and he's going to tie those 2 things in together very well. So you talked about, when you talk about a Mike Zimmer defense, you have to talk about the mugged A gaps, the sugar in the A gaps, right? And you talked specifically a minute ago about mugging those guys up and then bringing edge pressure. And so we'll take just a minute to talk through when you put 2 guys in the A gaps, what you're essentially doing is you're creating a 6-man surface for the offense to have to protect against. And the thing about that surface is that they know that they don't know which guy's coming. So what they have to do is they have to immediately protect against the most immediate dangerous threat, which is the 2 guys in the A gap. Because if you get a free runner in the A gap,
you're toast.
You're toast, and your quarterback's probably getting hurt. If you get Micah Parsons running through the A gap unblocked, like by the time he gets to 6 yards, he's at full speed and he's running clean through your quarterback. Like, you're in some trouble, right? That's how you wind up with Tony Romo on the ground against New York, writhing around in pain with a broken collarbone, is because you get a free runner through an A gap. So they have to protect those A gaps. So everything becomes for that offense, okay, how are we going to protect the A gaps? Which then we've talked a lot about, hey, Mike Zimmer is going to use Micah Parsons to create opportunities for other guys and know that Mike is going to get his. Mike is going to have his opportunities to get one-on-ones. He's going to get his. And so we can use him in some of these different places. So when you put Micah Parsons in an A gap, and we saw Dan Quinn put him head up over the center quite a bit and create kind of a 5-man surface. But that kind of creates a relatively easy protection diagnosis for the quarterback in the center. It's like, all right, we're going to go big on big. We're going to run Bob protection here. We're going to go big on big. We're going to take the 5 immediate threats. I'm going to name somebody for the running back to have responsibility for, and that's our 6 against the 6 most the most pressing threats. If one of those guys doesn't come, we can adjust, all that kind of stuff. When you put the 6th guy immediately on the line of scrimmage, on either side of the center, everything has to you'll see offenses answer it a few ways, and you've seen the Cowboys answer it. It's funny watching. I think it was some of your videos. They're doing 7-on-7 drills, and they have a linebacker mugged up and the running back mugged up right in front of him. In that 7-on-7 drill, he's not coming, but it's still the alignment, and you still have to answer. So a lot of times what offenses will do is they'll just take the running back and they'll stick him right on the center's shoulder or right on the center's butt cheek. And that way, and it kind of gives the tell of which way the center is going to go, but that doesn't matter because all right, I have now 6 guys on my blocking surface on the line of scrimmage. I can block all 6 of these guys. My center is going to turn one way. My running back's going to take the other guy, and then the other 4 guys are going to take the 4 down. And so what that allows you to do is that as a defense, it allows you to know that they're either going to mug that running back up to match, or they're going to full slide the protection one way or the other, or they're going to condense the protection down and allow a free runner off the edge. And a lot of times in those situations, and I guarantee you we'll see it when we get into these regular season games, where and probably even in the preseason some, because Zimmer is Zimmer and he's going to Zimmer, right? When we get into these preseason games and we get into this tape, we'll see these protection adjustments where the quarterback has responsibility for the free runner. The quarterback's hot off of this guy over here. And so what you can do as a defense is if you set those 6 guys, if you don't rush one of those guys and you rush someone else, if you still send 6, or even if you send 5, or sometimes, as you talk about Mike Macdonald and the rage around the league, the meta defense around the league going the next couple of years is going to be these simulated pressures where you show more than 4 guys rushing, only 4 guys rush, but you wind up with free runners because it's a non-traditional 4. So instead of the 4 down linemen, it's 2 of the defensive linemen, a linebacker, and your slot corner are all coming. 2 of your other defensive linemen and your other linebacker drop out, and now you still have 7 in coverage. You still have 4 in the rush, but because you were able to, with your alignment and your disguise, manipulate the protection, you can create free runners and create favorable matchups. So that is really the art of what Zimmer's trying to do with those mugged up looks. And it's almost like having Micah Parsons being able to play one of those roles is like the last infinity stone in the gauntlet. Like, okay, we already have all of this stuff that can create all of this power for our defense. And we're going to drop this massive piece into it and just power the whole thing up and just snap and sack quarterbacks, right? And then when you combine that with the thing that could happen to a Dan Quinn defense, it's not going to happen nearly as much to a Mike Zimmer defense because of the things you're talking about, is the quarterback is going to be hot, but the picture is going to change post-snap on him. And when you combine those 2 things, where you have a quarterback that's hot off of a potential free runner and the picture is changing post-snap, that's how you get confused defense. That's how you get Trey Lance hitting the linebackers in the chest with passes underneath in the red zone every single day. Every time they go in the red zone, you'll see a clip on Twitter or on Training Camp Live or somewhere of Trey Lance just drilling a linebacker in the chest with the ball because he's hot off the rush, because because of the disguise up front. And then the changing picture post-snap is changing what they're looking at, and it's creating these opportunities for these defensive backs and these linebackers.
Yeah, and you could tell, especially with Trey Lance, he was having a rough go the entire 3 days. I mean, me and Kyle Humans were having or me and Nick Harris were having a joke about what do you think is higher, Trey Lance's average depth of target or his average yards per carry during camp?
Yikes.
We both were like, I think his average yards per carry is probably higher. I mean, it was rare that he would throw further than 5 yards. He was, you could tell that things were moving quick. He didn't trust his eyes. A lot of times, like even on 7-7, he would just take off and run.
And we make fun of Senior Bowl quarterbacks when they do that, right? And when they take off running in 7-on-7. But
so it was unfortunate for him. But I think one thing that really also unlocks the Zimmer defense that we haven't really talked about, but I've heard some others talk about it, is having Al Harris as your secondary coach and assistant head coach and taking on more responsibilities. Because what we're seeing is they're still employing these Zimmer schemes that historically don't lead to getting your hands on a lot of balls. They're more like denying separation, denying the ball rather than looking to accumulate interceptions and do like playmaking stuff. You've seen Mike Zimmer kind of say that in some of his interviews throughout the offseason. But the Cowboys are still secondary, were still getting their hands on a ton of balls. They were still playing the ball in the air extremely well. Deron Bland especially was playing well. I mean, he was almost lights out throughout the entire time. Now he didn't have a top flight receiver like CeeDee Lamb to go against, but against like the Jalen Tolberts, Brandon Cooks, and the rest of the group, he was playing fantastic. Kalen Carson was getting his hand on a ton of balls. Even Nashawn Wright, who gets cooked on any breaking route that's ever been made, he was even getting his hands on a few balls himself, and the safeties as well. You even saw the linebackers sometimes get their hands on their balls. So I'm optimistic that even though the Cowboys' ability to create turnovers probably won't be as good as it was under Dan Quinn, I'm still optimistic that it's still going to remain really, really high in accordance to like NFL standards. And I think a lot of that goes to how Al Harris teaches his secondary and how he teaches the defensive backs. He was talking to someone near me, and I was kind of eavesdropping a little bit, and he was talking about how, people latched onto the fact last year that he says he doesn't teach scheme. And he was saying that was like kind of like disingenuous because obviously he has to teach some scheme, for like the younger players to teach them like, cover 1, cover 2, cover 3, cover 4, quarter, half, all of those type of coverages. But once he gets through that base foundational teaching, he's always looking at tendencies. He's looking at how we can play the ball in the air, how you can take cues from the quarterback and the receiver to know what's coming and those type of things. And you can kind of see that the Cowboys secondary has really latched on to that teaching because they're continuing to get their hands on a lot of balls. They're getting their heads around at the right opportunities. They're getting their hands up. They have great fundamentals. I mean, I speak about it all the time. You hate when cornerbacks swipe at the ball at the catch point because that leaves too much room for error. Doing this, you want to stick their hand through there. And they were doing that repeatedly fantastically. We saw Kalen Carson do that a few times after using a tailpipe technique to catch up on, drag routes and low crossers. There was just, I was honestly very impressed by not only the Cowboys secondary, but the Cowboys linebacking group as well. I was just impressed by those two groups in particular. I think they did a lot of fantastic things in the 3 days I was there.
Yeah, I think we got to spend some time talking about the linebackers. And, to an extension of that, we'll talk about the defensive tackles because those two groups are so intertwined. But, the name that feels like since the pads came on, it feels like you hear this guy's name every day, multiple times a day of, holy cow, what a play this guy just made, is Damone Clark.
Yes. Oh, he's a monster. Monster.
Yeah. And so it seemed like, last year, maybe, I don't know if it was the responsibility of having to wear the green dot and take over all that stuff midseason and all this other kind of stuff as such a young player, but it sure seemed like he was swimming last year, like just treading water, for dear life, holding on. But it seems like with what's going on in training camp so far, that he's being able to play fast. And we know he's fast. Like, they asked Micah Parsons, who's the fastest guy on the team. The only guy close to him on the GPS is Damone Clark, right? And the thing that I say a lot of times that you don't need linebackers to have a good defense, but you don't need great linebackers to have a good defense. But great defenses almost always have really good linebacker play. And so, there's a lot of factors that go into that. We talked about the defensive tackles a lot. We get a pin?
We got a 2-point takedown to start the match. First 30 seconds, Sarah Hildebrandt up 2-0 against the woman that she lost at the last 2 world championships to. So a very, very good start in the semifinals for the American.
There we go. Analysis you will never get anywhere else on any other Cowboy show. Training camp practice and Olympic wrestling all at once. That's awesome. But yeah, Damone Clark's been playing fantastic. Tell me what you saw from your eyes on the scene there about what he's doing, about what the difference is maybe between Damone Clark this year and Damone Clark you saw last year at camp and then throughout the season.
I think to find the reasoning why the linebackers are playing so well so far, I think you have to start up front. And I think more so than the quality of play of the defensive tackles, I think the scheme that they are playing in has been much more beneficial for the linebackers behind them, because in Dan Quinn's scheme, they were mostly get up through your gap and try to disrupt and create havoc in the backfield. And sometimes what that does, if you don't get into that backfield, but you're trying to, you're kind of leaving your linebackers hanging out to dry, especially when they use those combination blocks and those guards and what have you are able to climb to that second level so quickly and get on those linebackers quick. That makes life extremely, extremely tough for them. Here, it's more they're trying to build a wall up front, trying to make sure there's no leaks in the linebackers so that they can flow to their gap freely and make plays. And we saw that consistently. We saw plays where, where Mozzie says maybe he gives 1 yard of ground, but he's still causing that combination block to have to stay home for that extra tick longer so that, Damone Clark can get advantage over that blocker, get angular advantage, and get down and flow into his gap. And I think that's allowing him to play quicker. I think it's allowing his processing speed to be more natural. I think it's allowing his reactions to take over. And then you see the athleticism just really be expressed beautifully because he's allowed to, get downhill, attack, and, play sideline to sideline a lot more. Him and DeMarvian Overshown, because Eric Kendricks was out the first two practices that I was there. So it was mostly Overshown and Clark while I was there. And those two were just flying to the ball consistently. And you saw their closing speed. You saw their ability to fly sideline to sideline. I mean, when the offense tried to get outside, and if, someone like Tyler Smith was probably the only offensive lineman that was able to be quick enough to get out on the perimeter to maybe get a hand on these linebackers and try to create a running lane for the running backs. But besides that, they were able to flow freely sideline to sideline, and they made a ton of plays. I'm talking, in an inside run period where they're on the field for maybe 4 or 5 plays in a row, Clark would make like at least 2 to 3 of the plays himself. And it was just incredibly impressive for a guy who was coming in with low expectations. I think everybody kind of resigned themselves to the fact that he would be a backup, or at the very least, his spot would get taken by Overshown very quickly in the regular season. And as they're playing right now, the two inside linebackers or off-ball linebackers for the Cowboys are going to be Eric Kendricks and Damone Clark for the most part. I think you'll see DeMarvian Overshown get a role because he's also playing very well, and he brings a playmaking and kind of a frenetic energy that you can't replicate. But I mean, the way Damone Clark is playing, there's no way you can keep him off the field given what he's shown in training camp. He's definitely, Jake Ferguson talked about it before the season, who are guys that you need to look out for taking that big jump year to year. And he was 100% correct. Damone Clark looks like a totally different dude. And I think that's not only because of the personal development he's had, but also the schematic adjustments that have been made are much more beneficial to the second level of the Cowboys defense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, part of the problem, it seemed like last year, was that they were swimming mentally at the linebacker position. Marquise Bell never plays linebacker before in his life, steps up and plays linebacker, does an admirable job for the situation. Damone Clark, young player, steps up into a role he's never really had to play before, and swims mentally. And the team started taking advantage of what was going on with their eyes, with all the motion and pre-snap stuff. And then with the scheme that they were in, any bit of hesitation was enough to take their speed advantage at the second level away. And if they didn't have that speed advantage, they were going to be in trouble because they also don't have a ton of size at edge and all this other kind of stuff. So if offensive linemen could get to the second level on the linebackers and keep them from flowing side to side, they were in trouble on the edges. And so if you create eye candy for the defense, it causes them to hesitate, and they're not getting any protection from up front from the interior defensive linemen. You wind up in a really tough spot where now you have offensive linemen that are at a schematic advantage because of the fact that they have the extra leverage from the eye candy, plus the fact that you're not negating that with really quality defensive interior play that's holding them up. And now you wind up with linebackers that are just getting completely cut off and runs going around the edge for big gains.
That reminded me of probably I don't know how I missed this in my head, but one of the biggest things that you notice with the Zimmer defense is they have a definitive plan for attack is when teams are using shifts of motion at the snap and post-snap motion. You saw that there was clear communication, and there were like maybe 1 or 2 eye violations and stuff like that on those motions. And those were mostly with the second and the third team defenses. With the first team defense, they had their order of operations against motion at the snap and post-snap and shifts down pat. You saw them Cowboys rolling and rocking the safeties when they're playing from single high and from quarters, to make sure that you're structurally sound on both sides of the ball, whether they have the slot receiver on the defense's right, or they motion him to the left. They had definitive plans for attack for each one. And I think that's going to lead to a lot more consistent defense when they go against the, the Shanahan and the McVay tree, the two trees that have given Dan Quinn the most trouble throughout his entire coaching career. I think you're going to see the Cowboys defense have a lot more success in those situations because they know how to handle these different motions that these teams are going to use. And they have a definitive plan for attack that allows them to remain and play sound defense. I think a problem with Dan Quinn last year is a lot of times they would remain static on these defenses against these motions. So offenses were easily able to outflank them. They were able to create these advantageous matchups. They were able to get, instead of having the Cowboys having like 4-over-3, it'll be 4-over-4. So everybody has a one-on-one matchup. And then when you couple that in with them also, running rub routes or running these split releases, these type of things, it was just creating so much chaos for the Cowboys defense that when they didn't have the numerical advantage, when you don't have the numerical advantage, it makes it extremely hard to be consistently successful. And Sarah Hildebrand is going to the gold, baby.
Let's go. Let's go.
5-0. She beat the lady, the Mongolian girl that has beaten her the last 2 world championships. So she was able to get that tough competitor off her back. She's going to the finals. And the Japanese lady, who was the big favorite, got upset by the Indian representative from India. So we have a great opportunity for Sarah Hildebrand to win her first gold medal in the. We have Amit Allure for the for the American women's wrestling team. She's going to go up in probably about 6 matches here, so probably about an hour. She's going to go for her gold. So there's a chance that the United States freestyle wrestling team starts with 2 gold medals to kick off the Olympics, which would be fantastic. Let's go. Really exciting. But back to the Cowboys. Back to the Cowboys at hand. America's team.
There you go. There you go.
Just the definitive plan to how to defend motion, just by itself is going to make a huge difference in the Cowboys defense against these better schemed, these more cutting edge offensive coordinators. And I think I was expecting coming in, like I've said many times before, I was expecting there to be some issues with the transition, mentally. And who knows how that goes as, we're still early in camp. Zimmer hasn't put in. We didn't see the really complicated stuff that Zimmer's going to get into on third downs. We didn't see a ton of combination coverages where he's playing man to one side, zone to another, and he's doing like a crazy pressure off of it. He wasn't really getting into that kind of stuff. He was kind of more doing his base down stuff, first and second down, which for Zimmer, what he was doing is pretty vanilla. But when you compare it to what Dan Quinn was doing last year, that shit was rocky road. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It was very exciting to see. And for me, as someone who really looks into that stuff and I was really excited for what I'm seeing for the Cowboys defense, because I know we're just in the early stages. It's only going to get more complex, more complicated, and more fun from here. So I'm just excited to see how this builds as the year goes on. And hopefully, if the coaching staff does well enough and Zimmer's brought back as the defensive coordinator, year 2, year 3, maybe even year 4, it's going to get notably more and more complex, more difficult for opposing offenses to deal with. And that is just an incredible thing and super exciting for, I know, me and you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you mentioned that, we will dive pretty deep into this when we get into the scheme stuff, when we get into the regular season luckily, there are some ways, and this doesn't come, John's got to be careful because of his employer.
I am not providing us with any film.
I have access through some channels. I have access to, or at least in years past, and I don't see any reason why that would change now, to some preseason all 22 tape and regular season all 22 tape that's not through the NFL app. That allows us to rather than going, just straight through the whole game, we can do offense and we can do defense separately and things like that. So hopefully, and I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be this way. I need to check with my plug to make sure we're still going to be good. But hopefully we will have some preseason all 22 and we can start to get into some of the scheme stuff that we're talking about with players on the field, right? It kind of got too late in the season for it to make much sense to go back into 2023 stuff. But as we get to 2024, one of the things that you said that is like it speaks to my soul, because this is how I think about football and have for a long time, is that the entire game of football, all of the X's and O's aspects of football, is just a numbers game. It's just numbers and leverage, and that's all it is. And everything that an offensive and defensive coordinator is trying to do is trying to figure out ways to create numerical advantages in the places where they feel like they need them. And so because of that, if you wind up 4-over-4 to a side, or 3-over-3, as a defense, you're actually at a disadvantage in that scenario because of the fact that you don't know where they're going, for one. For two, they have the ability to, crossing routes and things like that can create some problems. And you also still have the quarterback who has the ball, who's, the extra person. So there's just a lot of numbers, a lot of leverage, a lot of angles that goes into this stuff. If you're not a math person, that's okay. It's not complicated math.
What is it? If you can count to 3, you can play for me, baby.
Exactly. And so we'll get into all this when we get to the tape. We'll highlight the stuff, but everything, protections, comes down to numbers. Do we have enough people to account for the people who can come? And if not, does the quarterback know that so that he can account for it? Coverages is the same way.
Just to jump off that, sorry, before you jump into the next one, that is why it's so important to have these disguises for a defense. Because if you're a defense who is, say, you're only rushing 4, but you show 6, and they're keeping 6, or you show 7 even, and they're keeping 6 or 7 in for pass protection, that means you only have to defend 4 eligibles instead of 5, or you only have to defend 3 instead of 4.
Exactly.
And that puts an even more advantage into the defense's pocket. And that's another really ingenious aspect of Zimmer's disguise and the fruits that they bear. Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's fine. And when you do that, you're only defending the 4 eligibles that are out because they had to keep an eligible in. But you still have the opportunity to create free runners and create one-on-one matchups, even though you're outnumbered in the rush, because of the way the leverages wind up. And because the offense doesn't, just like I said a minute ago, if you're 4-on-4 or 3-on-3 in pass coverage, you're at a disadvantage because you don't know where the guys are going. It's the same thing when you're pass protecting. I compare secondary play to pass protection and offensive line play all the time. It's the same thing from a pass protection. If there are 6 guys or 7 guys who are a threat to rush, you have to find a way in your protection to account for all of them, or all of them minus 1, and have the quarterback account for the last one. And if you account for 7 guys and only 4 of those guys come, you would think, oh, well, now the offense has 7, the defense only has 4, almost everybody's double teamed. But if the offense is accounting for those 7 by sliding everybody to the right, and then everybody to the offense's right drops, and 3 of the 4 guys are coming from the offense's left, now you have free runners with 4 or 5 offensive linemen standing over there to the side with nobody to block. Your quarterback is hot, but you have 7 guys in coverage against only 4 eligibles, and that's how you create free runners and sacks and confused looks on offenses and all that other kind of stuff that you didn't really see a whole lot over the last couple of years. Most of the time for the Cowboys, if the Cowboys were getting pressure, it was one of their guys winning because they were really good. and that's fine. Like, that's one way to play defense.
That's one of the ways TJ Watt is always, year over year, is amongst, top 5, top 10 among all edge defenders in unblocked pressures. And people go, how is that possible? He's the best pass rusher in the NFL, supposedly. And it's because the Steelers scheme with their zone pressures and all of that, the fire zone defense that they've been playing consistently since the Dick LeBeau days, it creates these free rushers because they're messing with the math. They're dictating protections, and that's allowing someone who you would think that the offense, if everything goes to shit, you have to block TJ Watt. But because they're having to deal with so many other things potentially coming, sometimes even someone like TJ Watt can fall through the cracks. And that's why he always gets so many unblocked pressures, where someone like Micah Parsons last year only had a handful of those.
Yep, absolutely. And now this style of defense doesn't come without its risks, right? Everything, it's also an asset allocation game. You only have 11 players. If you have 7 of them near the line of scrimmage, that means only 4 of them can be down the field. All this other kind of stuff. But it's a different way to play defense. And I think for a lot of people who watch the Cowboys, it's going to be an exciting way to play defense. And it is a lean a little bit more into kind of the typical meta of what the league is playing right now, with more two deep shells to start, more disguise pre-snap, changing the picture post-snap with simulated pressures and different guys coming instead of it just being the same 4 or 5 guys line up on the line of scrimmage and let's go beat our guys. So it's going to be really cool and really interesting to see that going. On the offensive side of the ball, I know you're kind of a defensive guy, especially in the trenches. What Tyler Guyton didn't practice. He's been sick. That's unfortunate.
Me,
I know. I know. What did we see on the offensive side of the ball that was noteworthy in either a positive or negative way?
Well, first we saw no one can block Micah Parsons. No one, not a single soul. That dude was wrecking practice after practice after practice.
The best defensive player in the league will do that.
It was getting comical at some points. I mean, Edoga, he actually does like a decent job against most of the other Cowboys rushers. Like he had some actually pretty good success against DeMarcus Lawrence, but that dude has zero chance. There were 3 sacks on Monday where he didn't even land a hand on Micah Parsons. Micah Parsons was hitting ghosts. He was fainting upfield and then coming back inside. It was just unbelievable. I felt bad for Edoga, but besides that, the thing that really stood out to me is Dak Prescott he's in his regular season form. He was accurate. He was making good plays. He was identifying things well. It was stark how big of a difference it was of picking up Zim's pressures when Dak was in compared to when Cooper Rush and Trey Lance was in. When Cooper Rush and Trey Lance in, there's free rushers coming everywhere. Protections are getting all mixed up. You have 2 people blocking one guy. You have another free runner coming the other guy. And at least when Dak Prescott was in there, the protections were sound. Now obviously guys would get beat quickly and he would still get pressure, still get sacked and what have you. But the overall written on a whiteboard was right when Dak Prescott was in, and that was really impressive. But he was also very accurate. You saw him make plays downfield. You saw him make plays short. You saw him make plays into the middle of the field. And you saw him, another thing that was great is he was working through his progressions extremely well. You would see him go to his first, second, hit his third, or go to his first, second, third, then hit the check down. Those were all really, really good to see. And then other guys, Jalen Tolbert impressed me. I think he's someone who's ready to step into that wide receiver 3 role. And I think he's going to be better than what Michael Gallup gave last year, which, honestly, what isn't that difficult because Michael Gallup was really poor last year, especially given that I think Dak Prescott really forced a lot of things to him because he was trying to get his confidence up. But you could tell Tolbert is a very confident guy. You saw him winning deep. You saw him winning in the middle. He was making vet-like plays on the sideline, toe tapping, showing great sideline awareness and stuff like that. I was really impressed there. Brandon Cooks, still veteran, sound. He was very consistent. He's not someone who's going to blow you away in these settings, but he was just consistently able to get open, make the catches when he had to, all of those type of things. One guy, before I got there, Tyron Billy Johnson was kind of the unsung hero among the wide receiver corps. But when I was there, it was the Jalen Cropper show.
Yeah.
That was making plays. It was mostly short to intermediate stuff, but the Cowboys slot corners and because Jordan Lewis, obviously because Jalen Cropper's a reserve guy, he wasn't going up against Jordan Lewis a ton. But the reserve slots had no chance against Cropper. He was winning short, intermediate. I mean, there was a 7-on-7 period where he ran with the first, second, and third teams, and he made touchdown catches with the first and second teams. He made like 3 catches with the third team. I think he had 9 catches overall in that period.
Yeah.
He was just all over the place. I think he was one of the more – you don't hear about it a lot, but I think he was probably the most impressive. While I was there, only the 3 days I was there, he was the most impressive kind of reserve back end of the roster receiver. Very impressed there. Tight ends, Jake Ferguson, I mean – dude's consistent. Dude's going to be ready for a great year. I think John Stevens Jr. is the even better. He's the best pure receiver of the bunch, which makes sense given his receiving background. Mm-hmm. Dude just has incredible body control, leaping ability, and ball skills. There were multiple passes where he had to leap up above the rim, contort his body, make grabs, and he did it really, really well. He's still very much a work in progress. When you would, as a blocker, you would see them going through blocking drills, and then while Ferguson was really smooth, Schoonmaker was injured the entire time I was there, so I didn't really get to see him. Hendershot was pretty smooth, and then you would see John Stevens Jr. going, and it was still a little bit regimented. It was kind of like he was thinking through the steps a little bit more rather than not being one fluid motion. So that's something that is going to need to be sounded up unless he's just going to be a big-bodied slot target for the most part. But he was really impressive from a receiving point of view. As far as the offensive lineman, man, I think Brock Hoffman may have converted me in terms of being the best center option for the team right now. He was the best center there. He outplayed Cooper Beebe each of the 3 days I was there. His snaps are better. He's much better transitioning from snap to block. Cooper Beebe is still having a lot of trouble transitioning. Even if his snaps are good, he's having trouble transitioning from snap to block. He's leaning a lot, something you didn't see him do on tape at guard or tackle, and you still didn't see him do at camp at guard or tackle. You saw him play much more consistently, much more balanced at the point of attack when he was playing at guard than he was at center, because he was constantly leaning a little bit, and that kind of inhibited his ability to play with leverage and create displacement at the line of scrimmage. But Brock Hoffman, he's not the most powerful guy, but he's very fleet of foot. He did really good at reach blocks, reaching and cutting off guys. And he showed, honestly, for such like a smaller center, he showed a really good anchor against, Mozzie Smith, against Rogers, against Carl Davis, even against Osa Odigizua on occasion. He was just really well anchoring there. And that's something that you need to see from these little smaller centers. They have to be able to anchor. And obviously, it's going to be different anchoring against Mozzie Smith, and it's going to be anchoring against Daron Payne, Dexter Lawrence, these monsters that are in the division. So those are going to be the true test. And like you said, when they get the Rams in house after, or is it the end of this week or early next week? I forget if it's before or after the game.
I can't remember now that you say it either.
Yeah, but you guys will find it out. It'll be on Twitter. But once that's going to be a real good test for him. But I think that as things stand now it's important to note that these were Cooper Beebe's second, third, and fourth practices in his entire life, taking most of his snaps at center. When he was at Kansas State, he would moonlight there on occasion, take a handful of snaps at the end of practice sometimes.
Robert's got us, by the way. Yeah. I efforted it at the same time Robert did. It's this Thursday. So we will there may be fights going on while we're live whenever we're watching, when we're talking on Thursday.
No better than Malik Neighbors, the pro boxer, eh? But,
yeah.
But I digress. But yeah, Brock Hoffman, very impressive. The best offensive lineman in attendance, in my opinion, was Tyler Smith. Zach Martin is obviously still really good, but he was kind of they did a lot of veteran days with him, or not veteran days, but like he would take a lot of plays off, and they're taking him in slow. Obviously, he's been in the league so long, he doesn't even need to be here.
Exactly. If he wasn't going to get fined $45,000 a day to not be there, he probably wouldn't be there. Yeah, I don't think anybody would blame him either. But
also saw Zach Martin on his off day at Zachariah Dunes getting lunch. That was fun. He's a giant thing. But Tyler Smith, Tyler Smith was fantastic throughout the entire week. I mean, one-on-one pass rush drills, no one could give him really any fits whatsoever. During the inside run, he was creating displacement, and that is a puller chef kiss. It was beautiful to see him on the perimeter, leveraging his athleticism and his power. There was on one occasion that he had Nashawn Wright zeroed in, and you saw Nashawn Wright kind of like back up, like, and then Tyler Smith just kind of those like landed hands and just kind of like walked them off.
I'm just gonna set you over here for now.
He didn't continue his, like, in a game. I would have wondered if he went true.
Oh yeah, he'd have carried him to the, he'd have blindsided him and carried him all the way off into the bleachers.
He was very nice to his teammate and just kindly escorted him out of the gap. But he was fantastic. Terrence Steele, I think he's looking closer and closer to his 2022 form. He looked really good in pass protection, especially when he was going against like the elite hand fighters, like a DeMarcus Lawrence. He was showing really good hand technique to replace and refit his hands. I was very impressed while staying balanced, which is very important with someone like Terrence Steele, who gets his weight on his toes a little bit when he gets too aggressive. And then watching him and Zach Martin work double teams in the run game is obviously extremely fun. They create big displacement there. That was exciting to see. I think TJ Bass was the best reserve lineman. He's super solid, super consistent. Um, he did really well. He was having a little bit trouble on Monday with Carl Davis. He got beat by Carl Davis once in the one-on-ones, and then the inside run, Carl Davis was giving him a little bit of fits. But the other 2 days, Carl Davis was a little bit of his whipping boy. He was taking really big advantage of the big boy from Iowa there. But yeah, those are kind of my big overall looks in this setting. Everything we're hearing about running backs look good.
Of course they do, because they get touched in the backfield and keep running because
I don't know
the defense
how
stops
they're
playing.
coming to these conclusions that these people look great, like they're evaluating their vision just based off what they're seeing or something. But I didn't see anything that made anybody stand out over any others. We're going to have to wait to the game situations for that. I honestly think people that were saying that were just kind of being disingenuous and just saying things that they knew people would gravitate toward. But besides that, those are kind of like my holistic views on the offense. We saw offense be very similar to what it was last year. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. You saw there were situations where they'd run a lot of jet sweeps. There were situations where the thing that was consistent is they were using a lot of motion. So that made me happy. So we're not going to see them revert back to their pre-week 6 offense. They're kind of continuing the evolution of that offense that they used post the bye last year. So that was great, but didn't really see anything too groundbreaking in those terms. People that I highlighted to you were impressive. Yeah, it was great to see that. I think the breakout star of the entire practices was the defensive line coach, Jeff Scanine. That dude is a ball to watch. Yeah. You could just watch him for the entire practice, do mother effing every other word, yelling at people, cracking jokes. His calves are shining in the sun's glory constantly. The dude is jacked out of his mind. But yeah, it was great.
Tried to send Mozzie Smith to visit Mickey Mouse and get a fast pass the other day. Beautiful.
He's not getting it. That was the thing that kind of irritated me a little bit, is that people were painting it like he's pissed off at Mozzie.
That's just coaches, right? That's just coaches' flight. Yes.
If you saw, that is the way he coached up anybody. And we know how important Mozzie is to this defense. So he's obviously going to give more personal attention to Mozzie Smith. The funny thing was when you saw guys like Denzel Daxon going, or some of these, down of the roster guys, he wasn't even looking at them. He's coaching up Mozzie.
He's over talking to Mozzie. Yeah. He's letting Greg Ellis, you handle the other guys.
No, it was when he only had the defensive tackles. Daxon and them, Carl Davis are going, and he's just like, Mozzie, you got to work with your hands here, get your feet here, throw your butt into the double teams. He's talking through, and these guys are all going, and he's just like talking to Mozzie, going through it, mother effing this, mother effing that, blah, 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 blah. And it shows you that they know that Mozzie is the guy that's going to make this kind of defensive line and kind of this run defense unit as a whole go. And he was giving him that attention, and it was all out of love. You could tell that Mozzie was taking it, and he was implementing the things that Jeff Scanina was saying. It wasn't this thing like Jeff Scanina's mother effing Mozzie because Mozzie's messing up constantly. He was just fine-tuning his technique more than the others because of how much more important that he's going to be this season than anybody else.
Yeah, it would be foolish to assume that, the defensive line coach is going to invest the same amount of time and energy and effort into coaching the 4th string undrafted free agent defensive tackle as he is the defensive tackle that they spent a 1st-round pick on 15 months ago, that they're going to depend on to be interior defensive lineman 1, basically, to be nose tackle 1, who is, like you said, sort of the linchpin, the centerpiece of how they want to build their run defense. Like, think about Linval Joseph all those years in Minnesota, and those guys, and Pecco and all those guys before that in Cincinnati, of those interior defensive linemen, those defensive tackles, how important those guys are. That's got to be Mozzie in this defense, and Jeff Scognina's got to get him ready. And so, of course, he's going to – that's like saying, why is Mike McCarthy spending all his time with Dak Prescott instead of talking to – they don't have a 4th quarterback right now, but instead of the 4th quarterback who's only here to take some reps in practice? Or why is John Fossil not talking to the backup kicker? They don't even have one, right? Like, it's to pretend that, and you hear guys who are in the league talk about this all the time, to pretend that the guys at the top of the depth chart that have more resources invested in them don't get more time, attention, and effort from coaches than the undrafted free agent guys, it would be silly. And you hear these guys talk about all the time about how the bottom of the roster guys have to prove that they can play in order to get opportunities, in order to get that coaching. And the top of the roster guys have to prove over and over and over and over and over again that they can't play before they lose that opportunity. So, again, the Gagnina stuff is interesting and funny because he's, you wind up with those personalities on any coaching staff. Rod Marinelli used to MF these defensive linemen up and down the field all day. It is part of being a coach, right? One question that we have from the live comments. Well, that's KJ. Thanks, KJ. We appreciate it. Yes. From the Fisher kid. We talked a little bit coming into the year. Maybe there's more heavy personnel use coming. Hunter Lepke getting some use at fullback. They just spent a second-round pick at tight end on Schoonmaker, who has, again, been out with injury the last couple of days. So, again, tough there. But they have Jake Ferguson. They have Luke Schoonmaker. They have Hunter Lepke. Are they using a little bit – and they also happen to be down a wide receiver in training camp. Not that necessarily matters for getting reps. But are they using – did you see and notice more big personnel looks on offense?
I didn't notice that in particular. Honestly, when Hunter Lepke was on the field, most of the time it was at running back. I didn't see a ton.
That's RB1.
Yeah, there was stuff on occasion. Obviously, when they would do goal line, you would see more heavier personnel, which I don't really like, to be honest, on the goal line. I know you're not a fan of condensing everything in heavy personnel in goal line situations, but you would see some. We know the Cowboys are going to do that.
Yep.
And that was something we saw during goal lines, but I didn't really see it a ton in the normal down and distance situations throughout camp. I saw mostly, the things that we see normally, 11 personnel, those type of things. But that was kind of, we didn't see them get crazy, just like I saw with Mike Zimmer, that they're just still in the building block stage of their defense. You didn't see him start to get crazy with his combination coverages and third down things that he was doing. We didn't see the offense get super crazy with their looks and super, creative with their looks or their personnel. I'm guessing that's something that they wouldn't, show in a training camp situation. That's probably something that they would do week to week when we get into the season, where they have more privacy and those type of things. So, and
they have walkthroughs and things like that are, not open to fans and stuff like that right now, and not even necessarily, I know some media is there, but it's not nearly as heavily reported on that they could be going through that stuff. And a lot of this
media isn't allowed to report on it, technically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's one of those, like, they're allowed to be there, but not allowed to report on it. There's no videotaping and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of the personnel stuff is going to be, game to game kind of, does this team have a really bad third linebacker that if we get this third linebacker on the field, we feel like we can pick on it with some matchup stuff with Jake Ferguson? If so, hey, let's put the second tight end on the field, force them into base personnel, and let's do that. Or do they have a really great edge rusher who doesn't play very much versus big people because he's not very good against the run? And if we put big people on the field and then throw out of that, we still feel like CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, and Jake Ferguson is enough to get open and create big plays, but it's going to help our protection to have those extra big bodies in there. So that's where a lot of that personnel stuff comes in. Justin, we covered the linebackers already, but is Overshown an All-Pro? Yes or definitely yes? Choo-choo on the hype train there. He's going to have to beat out Damone Clark for that spot. I think he's having a
let's worry about him getting in the starting lineup first, and then we'll move on to the All-Pro. But the thing that blew that I talked on repeatedly to people about is his closing speed is different than even a Damone Clark. When he closes on the football, that dude is closing on the football with speed, momentum, and violence. And it was just incredibly apparent in these situations. But, that does come with a caveat, is obviously we're not tackling here. How is that going to affect his ability to be a consistent tackler when he's not, coming to balance against these shiftier ball carriers? Is that going to lead to more missed tackles than you would like from a linebacker? In this environment, it looks incredible, and it was blowing my mind consistently. But I did think, like, when we get into these games in the regular season and you're not coming to balance here, are you going to be someone who's getting a lot of arm tackle attempts, or falling off tackles, or even whiffing on occasion because you're just coming in like a wild, like a bat out of hell, like the road runner, just like troop, just blowing into the point of contact there and falling off. Yeah, it's going to create some giant hits. He's going to take some souls without a doubt, but I'm worried about him missing a tackle maybe in a crucial situation. Maybe they throw a receiver screen and he's screaming out there and he misses a play and it goes for 60 or something. That's
because those kinds of plays, if the one guy who's not unblocked or who's not blocked doesn't make the tackle, it's a huge play because they have guys out in front. So you're absolutely right.
That's one thing that gives me a little bit of worry, but everything else, I was very, very encouraged by what I saw from DeMarvia and Overshown. The great thing is he looks completely healed from the torn ACL with no ill effects. Dude was playing 100%, extremely fast, extremely violent, and that is, I think, the biggest positive that you can take from his return.
And I think, you mentioned it earlier, he's going to get some run in the preseason games more than likely. Mm-hmm. I bet we'll see a lot of him and Maris Leofau in the preseason games, and so we will get to see a lot of that. Is he able to come to balance and make solid, clean tackles, or is he running by guys? We just mentioned Leofau, another young defensive player for the Cowboys that has generated some positive momentum and drumbeat is Marshawn Nealon. So we'll use this last couple of minutes. Robert asked the question, with Sam Williams gone with the injury, who's the best pass rusher behind Micah and Tank? I think he's talking edge rusher because I think the real answer would be Osa after those two guys probably. But is Nealon better than Muhammad and what's the other guy? Shaka Toney. Yeah, I knew. For some reason, I was going to say Jones, but I knew that wasn't right. Is he better than AQM and Shaka Toney right now already? Because I know he's gotten a lot of praise from a lot of guys who are.
Yeah, I would certainly say so. He was definitely the third best edge rusher type on the Cowboys roster. He was just the first thing you see when you look at him is he just already has an NFL body. He's extremely long. He has good bulk. He knows how to use his length. He plays with good pad level. He plays with great motor. His work ethic is great. He plays long. He knows how to use his length, which is important. The NFL is littered with crappy pass rushers who are long, who don't know how to use their length, and he knows how to use that long arm very well at this point. I still want to see him, open up his pass rush repertoire. He kind of leans a little bit too much, in my opinion, on the power and the long arm. I think he needs to add in more finesse, more parry type moves like chops and swipes a little bit more to keep offensive linemen guessing and know that they just can't anchor on his power consistently. But he was having a lot of success. He did some good things against Terrence Steele, and he did a lot of good things against, the awesome Richardses. I mean, he beat the crap out of Matt Waletzko consistently in camp, which was very impressive. And he did a lot of good work against the run, especially when he was the open side in and they'd run away. He did a lot of backside pursuit plays that were very impressive. He had a couple of plays where you would see where he would line up as a heavy five technique with a tight end outside of him, and he would get moved by that combination block where the tight end would come down and the tackle would base block him. Those ones he was still having a little bit of trouble in. There's a couple of times the Cowboys were able to get out to the edge on him there because he wasn't able to hold down that C gap and set an edge, or even really just maintain his gap integrity at that point. So that's something he needs to work on. But overall, the things that I was seeing from him, I was very impressed, and I think he's going to have a major role in this defense from week 1 until the end.
There you go. That sounds like exactly what the Cowboys need, especially with Sam Williams, the guy who was supposed to step up into this third pass rusher role this year, going down for the season very early.
I will say, between AQM and Shaka Toney has a little something. He really, really impressed me, especially the Monday practice. Outside of Micah, no one corners better than Shaka Toney. That dude was cornering really well. His ability to win high side is valuable in a Cowboys edge rushing rotation that besides Micah, there are not a lot of high side winners. So to be able to have another guy who can win with speed and who can win high side, I think that's gives him a leg up over AQM to make the roster there. So that was kind of good. He beat Terrence Steele once really impressively with a swipe on to win high side on the edge and a really impressive cornering to bend and flatten back to the quarterback. So that was nice. So I would say keep an eye on Shakatoni as he continues to get more accustomed to the defense and gets more comfortable. He has the worst number in the world at 72. Because you assume he's going to get cut just because they gave him that. But you saw a steady progression for him day by day to the point where Monday that he was creating a little bit of havoc with those second and third team defenses. So he's someone who I'm going to keep a close eye on during the preseason to see if he can continue that and really not only earn a spot on the roster, but earn a definitive role as a pass rusher, as the reserve kind of backup to Micah Parsons being because Sam Williams was kind of like that backup speed rusher to Micah. Mm-hmm. And I think that Shakatoni can potentially be that if he continues the developmental curve that he is currently on.
Yeah, and Dante Fowler has been that guy for the last couple of years too. Is the guy who could win on the edge. You use the term high side, which I love, and it's the technical term a lot of guys will use. But what you mean when you say high side is the outside, win the edge rather than winning inside. And there's just not that many guys in the league that can consistently win the edge with speed and athleticism around the corner against NFL tackles. And so if you've got one of those guys, it's valuable, not even necessarily because they're always going to finish, but because it almost sets a top on the pocket. It sets the back of the pocket, and it just creates quick havoc that then you wind up with guys like Tank Lawrence and Oso Digizua. And you even saw Mozzie Smith on a couple of reps where Dak had to come forward in the pocket because the pressure was coming around the outside of him. He had to come forward in the pocket. And if it was a live rep, Dak would have been feeling it would have hurt because Mozzie was flying. He's a very, very, very good athlete. And he was flying, and you could see that speed and athleticism show up. And if you get those guys that create havoc on the edge, push pockets, cause quarterbacks to move, that's where you get some of those cleanup sacks that you like to see a lot. And if Shakatoni's a guy who can kind of take that Dante Fowler role of, every once in a while he's going to get around that corner clean and finish. But a lot of times what he's going to do is he's just going to create quick havoc that's going to cause other guys to have opportunities. That's a really valuable piece to a defense too. Even if it's a guy they signed real late in the process, if he's got that specific role and can make the team that way, it's super valuable there.
100% agree.
You have any last minute things you just got to get out before we go here from your few days at camp?
I think that's it. And I think I really hit on everything that I wanted to hit on mostly. Jeff Scanina. If there was a Hard Knocks, that dude would be the star of the show.
Be the star of Hard Knocks. There you go.
I want to be a fly on the wall when he does a film session just because I guarantee you he's mother effing people every single play, and it's hilarious.
There you go. The Cavs would be the star of Hard Knocks. All right, guys. Thanks so much for joining us today. It is Tuesday. Thursday is the Cowboys joint practice with the Rams before their Sunday afternoon preseason game. So we made it. We're here to the point. They're going to start playing football against other people, and it's going to happen. We made it to real football against themselves. Now we made it to football against other people, and in another month, there's going to be football against other people that counts in the standings, and that's going to be an exciting thing to be able to see and be a part of, taking in and breaking down. And we will be here for you guys through it, all through the season. And again, thank you guys so much for being with us. Thank you guys for watching after the recording. If you are watching now or watching, on the replay, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, all of the YouTube things that you guys all know. You guys all watch YouTube. Do those things. It helps grow the channel. It helps get this show in front of other people who want really good Cowboys content. And so we can grow this show throughout the season so we can continue to do cool stuff for you guys. And take advantage of PFF sending John to camp. So thank you guys so much. If your business has accounting problems, Silver Moon Financial can help you. silvermoonfinancial.com, or just slide in my DMs on Twitter. We can help you there too. All right, guys. Thanks so much. Have a fantastic rest of your week. We will talk to you later.